Hi there. You might have heard of Sass or seen people using Sass, but not really know what exactly it is, or maybe you have an idea of what it is, but you haven't seen the worth of getting into it yet. So in this video, I'm exploring why I love Sass, and we're going to be doing it first by looking at what Sass actually is, and then looking at three really useful features of it, or three of the things that made me originally fall in love with Sass. So we're going to be looking at the parent selector and nesting, we're going to be looking at imports, and we're also going to be looking at mixins. Hey there, my name is Kevin and welcome to my channel where we learn all about how to make the web and how to make it look good while we're at it. And one of those things that can help us make the web is Sass. Now, I've been using Sass for about 4 years now, I think, and I'm pretty sure I was first introduced to it by Travis Nelson of DevTips fame. When he was using in one of his videos because he was really big on using the nested version of Sass, and it intrigued me and it made me want to look into it a little bit, and the more I looked into it, the more I fell in love with it. And I want to explore why I love it so much with you and why I think that you should at least give it a shot. Actually, I love it so much, I've decided to make a course about it. It's called Sass From Beginner to Real World, and if you're interested in it, you can wait until the end of the video where I'll talk a lot more about it. And if you don't want to wait until the end of the video, there is a link down in the description below, so you can check that out right away if you want. And I'm really nervous and emotional a little bit, and actually I'm just feeling so many emotions right now. I don't even know what emotions I'm feeling because the course is live. It's there. You can go and register for it right now, and there's a link in the description, and that freaks me out a little bit because it's my first premium course that I've ever done. So this is a little bit of why I love Sass so much that I actually made a course about it. Because I think if you write CSS, I really think Sass can just make your life easier. Now, before getting into the nitty-gritty of this, where I want to show you how cool Sass is, I just want to explain a little bit of what Sass actually is, because if if you're here, you may not know what Sass is. You've just heard it thrown around, or you've seen some things with it. So it's a preprocessor, which means we're writing in a different language. And don't get scared by that yet. But we're writing in a different language, and that Sass gets compiled or turned into regular CSS that the browser can actually read and understand. Because when we write in Sass, we're doing things a little bit differently, so the browser wouldn't actually be able to read it. So we first write our Sass, that gets passed through, turned into CSS, expanded out, and then you get a nice big CSS file at the end. And we're going to see that in a second when I get into the code. And the reason we're doing this is because we can use a whole bunch of extra features and things that aren't included in CSS. It lets us write a lot less code and still get these big output of CSS, and it can be super handy. It can let you be more organized with your work, write code faster. Super useful. But then you might be going, Kevin, I don't want to learn another language. There's enough languages out there. The cool thing with Sass is there's actually two versions of it. There's the original, it's called Sass, and it has a nested way of writing it. Or then they added SCSS, which stands for Sassy CSS. And that's what I'm going to be looking at in this video. It's what I look at in the course, because it's just like CSS. It looks a little bit different because you have to get used to it, but if you write regular CSS, that's actually valid SCSS. You're writing a valid SCSS by changing nothing you're doing. So the cool thing with it is you don't actually have to completely learn a new language all at once. You can just keep writing your CSS the way you're already writing it, but adding in one little thing at a time. So you go, oh, cool, these variables, let me see how those work. Or, oh, a mixin, this is the only thing for now I'm going to add into my repertoire. So I add in this mixin, but everything else I'm doing, I'm writing exactly like I did before. Or, oh, look, this parent selector, it saves me a little bit of time. This is cool. You're not learning a complete new language. Everything's going to look super familiar. It's going to look a lot like CSS with these little differences. And you don't have to learn a whole new language at once, which is super handy and super cool that you can just sort of add in these little features as you're going. So it's sort of like taking CSS and just adding extra new functionality to it. So it's really not difficult to learn. And let's go and see some of those really cool things with it now. All right, so as we dive into this, just before I get started, I'm assuming you're not familiar with Sass. So on this side, I am writing Sass, and you'll see an SCSS extension here, which is Sassy CSS. And over here on this side, I have my regular CSS file. So anything I do on this side is going to get compiled from this into my Sass on that side. So let's start just by doing body. And I can do background of red over here, and when I hit save, we see that that appears over on this side. And so that's really cool. Now if you want to know how that's happening automatically, I am using an extension for now because I think it's the easiest way to get started. So I'm using VS Code and I'm using Sass Live Compiler. I'll link to it down in the description below. It's super easy. It just works pretty much out of the box. And so if you want to start playing with it, you can do that. And of course, I'm probably going to do some videos where I'm focusing more on setting it up and starting to use it. But this video is not about that. This one's about the features that made me fall in love with it to hopefully spike your interest in Sass as well. So now that we see that my SCSS file here and what I write here is getting turned into CSS, and hey, look at that, they look the same. So as I mentioned in my little introduction, you don't have to start by writing things from, you can just be adding on to what you already know. So the first thing here is that I want to look at is nesting in the parent selector. So this is something that is pretty cool, and it's a big win for me because I use BEM. So to take a look at what I'm talking about, say I have a parent class, and in my parent class, I don't know, we give this the background of light blue and some padding and some other things, and you make it look nice and sexy, and then you want to have a child element. You can actually nest in here, and so I could put .child and say that the background on the child is green. So this might look really weird, and I'm going to hit save, and we're going to explore what this actually does. So you can see my parent is doing what you'd expect it to. I'm getting my parent selector in my CSS, and the background is light blue. And then what it's doing is this is creating a nested selector here. So it's doing my child that's inside of my parent. So you might be wondering when this is actually useful. Well, I'm sure a lot of you have had something like a nav, and then you have all your stuff in here. So the nav is, well, we can keep our light blue background on there, but then we might have our UL that we want to have a margin of 0, padding of 0, list style of none, and you probably want those going horizontal, so maybe like a display flex on there or something. And then you probably have your list items, which maybe you want to add a little bit of margin left on or something. I don't know, you want to do some stuff, and you can do your links in there. So this can be super useful now because you have your nav, which gets its light blue background, your nav UL, which is getting the settings you want on it, and the nav LI. So you're saving yourself a few keystrokes along the way. Before we fall in love with this, there is an important thing with this is some people really don't like nesting in Sass. There are, it can get dangerous because here, instead of doing it like that, some people start doing nav and then they do the LI in here. We'll do our margin left of 10 pixels, let's say, and then in here you're doing your A and doing like a color red. So then you're getting like your A, LI, UL, nav. This might cause some specificity issues. I can't say specificity if you know me. I'm saying too many specificities, but you get the point. It can cause some issues. So nesting is a little bit dangerous in Sass. You got to be careful. But and I love nesting. I think it's cool. But what I really love, and especially because I write using BEM, and if you don't know what that is, you'll see a little bit of an example now. But maybe instead of doing nav UL and nav UL or nav LI and nav A, you've given all of those classes. You've called this your nav list item, and your nav link. I can use this parent selector. So the parent selector is just an ampersand, and then I can do anything I want. So let's pretend I have like let's just do a nav. BEM would be double underscore. So double underscore list, and then I could have my margin. I won't do it all. Margin 0, padding 0, and any other styles on there I might want. I can have my and list item, list, or just call it item, nav item. I can have my margin left of 10 pixels, and I can have my and link, and this could be color red. Now the cool thing with this is it's not going to make nested selectors like this does. Once I use my parent selector, as long as I'm gluing everything together with it, when I hit save on there, you see it's making a separate class for each one of these. So the ampersand here is turning into whatever the parent, the nested parent is here. So I'm getting nav list, nav item, nav link. And I absolutely love this. I think this is super useful. I use it all the time. What you can just want to be careful, like if I put an ampersand space, you see it's, well, nav, say I did dot list. Now I am getting my nesting and stuff like that. So it can be a little bit, just you want to glue everything together if you want to stick with a single class like I'm doing here. And you can actually get pretty advanced with this. One thing I like to do, if you want to do like a CSS only menu with like a hamburger or something, you might have a nav toggle. And So here I'm just going to put like this is an example. I'm not going to code the whole thing up, so I might do something like that. But you can also reuse it. So say I have my nav toggle checked. With my nav toggle checked, and then I can reuse my ampersand. So now I can do my nav menu. And here the style, we style something, style stuff. And so I get my nav toggle when it's checked. The sibling nav menu will get its own styles on it. So you can reuse, if you need to have some nested stuff, you can reuse the ampersand multiple times, which is not terribly often I use it, but can still be really, really useful. But I really love this parent selector, and I think it's super useful, and especially because it puts out a separate class for everything, and you're not getting nested CSS on this side. So really good. We're dealing with just single classes, makes life a lot easier, and really, really cool. The next thing I want to look at is a mixin. So mixins are really awesome. One thing I like to use for my mixins is, let's just put a little comment here, too. And also, since I'm doing comments, you can still do your CSS comments, and CSS comments get compiled into your CSS. But if you do a single line comment with 2 forward slashes, it leaves comments in your Sass file that do not end up in your CSS file. So that can be kind of useful as well. So here for mixins, let's create a mixin. So to create a mixin, we get to use the @ symbol and rewrite the word mixin, nice and easy. And then you give it a name. So I'm going to call this MQ for media query, because media queries, they're not terrible, but I like to write media queries. So I'm going to do something weird. I'm going to put a little size here with a $sign, which is an argument. I'm giving it the argument, and the argument's name is size, and I'll explain this, and you'll understand it in a second, I think. So now I'm just going to write my media query. So add media, only screen, and min width. But instead of giving a min width, I can actually write size here. And add content. So this might look really weird, and you might not really get what I'm doing here, but I think you will in a second. So I've created a mixin. It's not doing anything. If I save this, we're not getting any CSS right now. This is when you create a mixin, it doesn't do anything right away. I have to actually use that now. So you might do, say, body color of red, and then instead of having to write out a media query every time you need to use one, I can do @include. So this is going to call my media query, and then I can say body color of blue. Now what I did here with the size thing, if we want to look back at that really quickly, I have size here and I've put size here. So if I come here and I put 500 pixels, it's going to take the 500 pixels, it goes, oh, that's what the size is, so it's going to use the size as my min width. So I can hit save on that. And starting here, we can see body color red, like I have here, and then my whole media query comes out. So if you need lots of media queries, this can be super, super handy, because instead of having to write out a whole media query, I'm just writing this MQ, include MQ. So, it's not a huge savings, but I can write a lot less code. And what's even cooler, and a little bonus here, and the reason I did decide to use a media query, is because you can actually nest media queries inside with Sass. So I can come here and say @include MQ 500 pixels. And I don't have to write the whole body thing all over again. I can do it right here. So then color is blue, or it's green, so we just see the, and hit save. And you can see here it actually got changed over to green. It looks exactly the same as what we had here, but I'm doing it like that because my media query is nested inside the body. It knows what to do with that. So I find that super, super handy. And another mixin that's a little bit, one of the reasons we want to use mixins is because it's really, it can be, they save us time. We don't have to rewrite the same code all the time. So one that I like to use is @mixin. I'm going to call it uppercase. And you can shorten that, like I might do UC in production just because it's faster, right? But I'll do uppercase for a demo. And I'm not going to give this one an argument. I'm just going to write @uppercase. I'm going to do a text transform uppercase. But 99% of the time when I use uppercase text, I also want to do a letter spacing of, say, 1 pixel. And this can be really useful just because when text is all uppercase, especially like body text or text that's not titles, it gets a little bit harder to read. So adding a little bit of letter spacing doesn't make a huge difference, but it's this little adjustment that can just make people's life a bit easier when they're reading it. So I can come here on my body and say @include uppercase, and it's going to take those 2 lines of code and it's going to save them in here automatically. Or it's going to put them into my CSS. So I can write 1 line here and it's putting 2. Or you can imagine, I don't know why, but maybe your uppercase text is always going to be a color of red and font weight bold. So all of that comes out there, but that's on my body. I don't know why I do it on my body. But then say I have a title, I could do an @include uppercase, and then I could come back and, maybe there's a subtitle. Well, not probably not. You get the point though. @include uppercase. I'm just making up examples now. I wouldn't actually use it like this, but just to show you, I'm writing 1 line of CSS or Sass, and it's outputting 4 lines of CSS. So that could be super cool and super useful. So for imports, I'm going to open up my little side panel here so I can see my file structure. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to make a few other CSS or SCSS files here, and we're going to do that off screen. So we'll be back in 1 second with some extra stuff in here. All right, so you can see now I have a blank file now, and over on this side my CSS file is empty. And what I've done is I've taken all the stuff I had in here, but I've put it into 3 different files. So I have an abstracts file where I'm putting my mixins. So abstracts is commonly used for things that don't actually get compiled down. So this doesn't turn into anything unless I use it. I have my nav here where I took those great navigation styles that I did and put them in here. And I have a typography file here where I put in the rest of the stuff we had. And right away when I'm working here, it's not like these are all saved files and nothing's happened. And the reason for that is these all have an underscore in front of them. So just to show you, if I rename this without the underscore, and I'm going to push save on this, it's actually going to make a nav.css file. So it's made a separate CSS file here as well as a map, and we're not going to worry about maps right now, but I'm just going to delete those. And I'm going to bring the underscore back in here because I don't want that to happen. So when we put an underscore in front of a Sass file, we're creating a partial file. Sass knows that this isn't something that it should be compiled down into anything because it's a partial file. It's not my final finished file that I want to make into my CSS. And then the way I would get those to all show up is I can do an @import, and I'm going to import and I'm just going to write abstracts. And then I can do we want to put @import. Let's do our nav, and let's hit save. And you'll see right now I'm getting my nav is coming in. And then we'll come down here and we can add our @import typography. Hit save, and now my typography has been added into there as well. And if I switch the order here, it switches the order in my CSS file. So the order that we're importing them ends up being important into how it's turning into your final CSS file. So if that's important, it is something to take into consideration when you're organizing your main CS or SCSS file that's importing everything. Now this is a very basic example, and just to show you something that's a little bit more larger in scale, I'm going to open up another project. So this is the final project I'm doing for my Sass course that I'm building, which is going to be a 5-page site. You can see 5 HTML files, but here in the SCSS file or folder, you see that there's a whole bunch of stuff. I have my main.scss, which is my final thing. This is what's getting compiled to a CSS file. And in here I have other folders. So my main.css is just importing things from all of those folders. You can see a whole bunch of things that are being imported, and you can quickly see I have a whole bunch of abstracts, so I have stuff going on in there. Then I have my base styles. I have a layouts area, so this is what's controlling all my general layouts. And then individual components are all getting their own file. So if I go and look inside the components, each one of those has its own file here. So if I need to work on my hero, I go to components, open up hero, and these are all the styles that are related to my hero area specifically. Now, I know one big thing is you can search code. So organizing it like this, I could just search for the styles that I'm after, and 100% you could. For me, I find this the way you can choose to organize it just works out super well, and you can organize it the way you want. There's a really popular system that I sort of loosely base everything on called the 7-1 system. I'll link to that in the description down below as well, if you're curious about that. And I just find this takes a bit of the guesswork out of it, and you can still do searches across multiple files anyway. So if you're really big into the searching, it's not a big deal. You can just search and find what you're looking for at the end of the day. If you're really big into searching, though, you might not be a big fan of this parent selector, but I'm a big fan of the parent selector, especially for stuff like pseudo elements and other things like that. And while we're here, one last thing I am going to bring up just really quickly, because I do have some variables set up. So I am using Sass variables in this project. But with the advent of CSS custom properties, those are variables, but they're built right into vanilla CSS. And on top of that, they're more powerful and versatile. The one part of it is if we never had variables in preprocessors, we wouldn't have them in CSS today. So I think, thank you to Sass and Less and the other preprocessors for coming up with it. Another nice thing right now, CSS variables they're good. I use them. I love them. I use them. I'm actually using them also in this project. But they do have a bit limited browser support. It's really good, but it's not perfect. So this takes that out a little bit. And if you really want to start pushing the game, you can see this is a normal variable that I've set up. And I'm not going to jump too much into how variables work, but just if you're wondering about it, things like this where I'm making a map and you can make lists and stuff like that can be super, super useful, and it's sort of pushing things to another level, and maybe CSS is going to get there one day too, which would be really cool. But if you're wondering about variables, CSS variables have taken some of the shine off of preprocessor variables, but I think they're still super useful, and they still do have a place in projects today. So there you have it. I hope you think that's cool. I hope you think it's awesome. As I said at the beginning, it wasn't a deep dive into each specific topic and exactly how it's working. It was more just to show off the features that Sass has. They're not hard to learn, though. As I mentioned, you can also just add in one of these at a time. So you learn how that one thing works really well, add it in, and then learn the next thing and add it in. So for that, I think it's really, really good that you can incrementally add in all these cool features to your workflow. And that's really, really neat. And the big news, once again, is I have a course now. It's my first premium course, and you can pre-register for it now. And it's a registration period now until February 1st. So if you're watching this video before February 1st, you can register for it now, and the pricing is a little bit lower. And on February 1st, when the course officially launches, the prices will go up a bit. And if you buy now, you'll get your content starting on February 1st. So it's a 7-day period now of little, get in the door early and get a bit of a discount. And to give you an idea of what the course is about, I think the name of it gives you a little bit of information. So it's Sass from beginner to real world. So I really start at zero. I'm assuming you've never touched Sass, and we're going through and touching on pretty much everything there is in Sass. We're going from the few of the things we looked at here. We'll touch on variables, we'll touch on extends, operators, and more of the simple things. But we also get into Sass functions, whether it's using the built-in ones or creating your own functions. We get into creating loops. If you're used to JavaScript and doing for loops or if-else statements, you can do that with Sass, which is really awesome, and it opens up some really cool possibilities. We get into maps and lists, and it's covers a lot of material, but it's not like, but I wanted to make it more than just a course of here's all the stuff Sass can do. So throughout the course, there's two things I do a little bit different. One of them is I challenge you throughout the course. So here's, we learn a variable, you find out what a variable is. Now you're going to get a challenge to see if you really do understand how variables work, because you have to try and figure out how to do something with variables. Or with the mixins we just saw. A quick example, but we'll get into more advanced mixins and doing some cool stuff with them, but I'll show you how something works. Then, okay, let's use that in a different context, but I'm not showing you this time. You see if you can figure it out. So the challenges, I think, will help, and also we build real projects with it. So we're going to be building out a few components like a pricing table, an e-commerce card, so you're using it in the, we're not just looking at the theory of it so much like I was in this one, but we're actually building stuff with it. Including also a one-page single, sort of one of those long scrolling sites, and a 5-page blog type site where file organization and all of that starts becoming really important on the larger scale sites that we build out in it. So we're taking everything we learned throughout the course and actually applying it to a real project. Because I think part of learning is following what I'm doing. Part of it is challenging yourself, and part of it is seeing it in things that are realistic and not just sort of theory or understanding the feature, but how does that feature work when I actually want to use it. So I try and do all of that. The full course is over 150 videos. It's over 10 hours of content, and it's really big. So I also decided to make a Sass Basics version of the course, much smaller scale. It's about 3.5 hours long. It's still over 50 videos. And in that one, we're covering the most useful functions of Sass for sort of day-to-day stuff. So it doesn't get into creating your own functions and things like that. It's mixins, imports, partials, extends, operators, probably a couple of other things. We do the e-commerce cart and the pricing table, challenges throughout. And it's the features in Sass that I think are the best on a smaller scale, and then the big projects and the more advanced concepts, which can really start doing some crazy magic stuff with, like when you start creating your own functions, those are part of the larger course. So there's a link to both of those versions in the description below, as well as a page that compares the two of them. So if you want to look at sort of what's the difference between the two before you make your decision, if you want to buy it, that is there. I hope you're interested in it. Again, it's until the February 1st, so if you have to get it before February 1st. So if you want the special pricing on it, I think that's it. I'm talking fast. I'm nervous. I've never done something like this before, so it's kind of crazy for me. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you learned something from this. I hope you learned a bit more about Sass and why Sass is great. And if you're interested in the course but you're not sure about it yet, go over onto the community. You can ask me all about it there. And speaking of the community, if you buy the course, there's a private channel in the community where you can get access to me or anyone else who's in there that wants to answer your questions. If you're stuck on a challenge or something like that, you're not stuck. You can ask people that are in the course or ask me. I'm going to be hanging out there all the time. So you also get access to that, which I think is another cool thing in the course, if I don't say so myself. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any other comments or questions you want to leave, by all means, we have a comment section right here, so go for it. And massive thank you to my patrons. You guys are helping keep the lights on, so I always appreciate it, and especially to my supporter of Awesome Lauren. Thank you so much for the generous support. So over the next few weeks, you can expect more videos on Sass from the basics of it, setting it up, how to set it up, how to install it, how to start using it, and some cool stuff and features. And not only that, we're going to be building stuff like I always do here. So not a huge change of pace. And until then, though, don't forget to make your corner of the internet just a little bit more awesome.